Good afternoon. We are pleased to welcome you to this afternoon session titled Superheroes of World Literature. What constitutes world literature are all the big and important novels from different countries translated to English to be more accessible to the international market. They become part of the world literary canon. But what about transnational translations? Translators are the new superheroes who ferry works across languages and across cultures. We are pleased to welcome today 4 speakers. The first will be Annette, who studied history in Zurich and women and development studies at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. After working as a lecturer and trade union officer, she has been a freelance author since January 2015. Annette was awarded a Swiss Literature Prize in 2017. Her column, Dreaming the World, appears every 2 weeks in the weekly newspaper Was. Since 2017, she has published longer reportages from the Philippines, Shanghai, and Seoul. As a literary translator from Filipino to German, she has translated books by Luna Sikat Cleto, Alan Enderain, Lualhati Bautista, and Isabelo de los Reyes. She will be followed by Dr. Luis Castellvi Laucamp. He is a senior lecturer in Spanish Cultural Studies at the University of Manchester. As a researcher, he specializes in early modern Hispanic literature and culture. As a translator, he specializes in translating both poetry and prose from English into Spanish. He has translated 3 poetry books, including works by Clive James and Percy Bysshe Shelley. In terms of prose, he translated a short story collection by Nick Joaquin, La Mujer con Dos Ombligos, published in 2023. In September 2025, he published his translation of La Hermana de Soledad, Jose de Liza's novel about the Filipino diaspora. All of these translations have been published by Pretextos, one of Spain's most prestigious publishing houses. Next is Zoe Beck. She writes, translates, and runs culture books, publishing together with Jan Karsten. She studied English and German literature in Gießen, Bonn, and Durham, among other places. Creative producer for international television film productions at Kirsch Media. She worked as an editor for dubbing productions, Disney Channel, subsequently working as a dialogue writer and dubbing director. Since 2004, she has been a freelance writer and literary translator. Lastly, we have Alexandra Rack. She studied German literature with a focus on children's and youth literature, as well as art education, cultural anthropology, and European ethnology in Frankfurt. After completing her studies, she traveled the world and worked for 10 years as an editor at large at a large publishing house in Hamburg. Today, she's a literary translator from English, freelance editor, author, anthology editor, speaker, and juror for the German-French Youth Literature Prize. She lives with her family in Hofheim am Taunus. She has translated books by E. Lockhart, Roddy Doyle, Sid Sharp, among others, and Candy Gurley's Wild Song, published by Rothfox. So let us please welcome our 4 distinguished speakers.
Yes. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, hören Sie mich? Bitte, ja. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrten, zuerst mal herzlichen Dank an die DolmetscherInnen Jacqueline Klemke und Kai Kempe, dass wir hier die Möglichkeit haben, Deutsch zu sprechen. Ich erlaube mir das besonders deshalb, weil es sozusagen ein Lebensprojekt von mir ist, eine direkte Linie vom Philippinischen ins Deutsche zu legen, also nicht immer über Englisch gehen zu müssen. Dank diesem Gastlandauftritt ist es gelungen, Verlage für dieses Wagnis zu begeistern. In den letzten 2 Jahren habe ich 4 Bücher aus dem Filipino übersetzt. Sie wurden bereits genannt. Filipino ist eine Amtssprache der Philippinen. Sie beruht auf Tagalog. Tagalog wiederum ist die Regionalsprache von Manila und Umgebung. Im Folgenden werde ich 2 Wörter aus diesen Büchern vorstellen. Zuerst aus dem Buch Das Meer der Aswang, Aswang Laot im Original. Es ist 2021 im Original erschienen. Alan Enderain ist der Autor. Der Roman spielt jedoch in der ersten Hälfte des 18. Jahrhunderts, und zwar an einem fiktiven Ort, der heißt Baryu Baryu. Das ist ein sehr lustiger Name, finde ich. Und deshalb dachte ich, im Deutschen sollte auch ein bisschen klar sein, warum das ein lustiger Name ist. Der Ort Baryu Baryu liegt auf der Insel Panay, wo die Geschichte spielt. Und da werden verschiedene Sprachen gesprochen, nämlich Bisaya, Hiligaynon und Kiniraya. Alan macht das oft, dass er auch regionale Sprachen in sein Filipino einbaut. Damit nimmt er quasi den Verfassungsauftrag ernst, der in der Verfassung von 1987 festgehalten ist, dass sich Filipino anreichern soll, um inklusiver zu werden. Auf den Philippinen werden zwischen 130 und 190 Sprachen gesprochen, je nachdem, wie man Sprache oder Dialekt definiert. Nun, also Baryu Baryu. Baryu heißt auf Bisaya ein Schilfgras, fand ich heraus. Aber wenn ich Baryu Baryu hörte, hörte ich auch Baryo Baryo, weil U und O manchmal so ein bisschen wegwackeln. Also das heißt, Baryo ist ein Ort. Dann habe ich mit dem Autor gesprochen, Alan, und er sagte, er hört auch Balyu Balyu, weil das ist das Problem mit rechts und links, also dass oft L auch R sein kann. Und das heißt, Balyu heißt verrückt, wahnsinnig geworden. Deshalb habe ich mir an dieser Stelle eine kleine Erweiterung des Textes erlaubt, in Absprache mit dem Autor. Da heißt es dann, es ist still in Baryu Baryu. So heißt der Ort. Er ist nach dem Schilfgras benannt, aus dem die Schlafmatten gewoben sind, und klingt wie Balla Balla und Büren Büren in einem Wort. Das heißt, das ist ein Beispiel aus diesem Roman. Im Zentrum steht ein Mädchen, das heißt Luklak. Sie verwandelt sich im Umgang mit allerhand Geisterwesen in ein Krokodil. Eines Nachts fliegt eine edle Dame in ihren Traum und erzählt ihr uralte Geschichten aus dem Epenzyklus des Sugidanon, wie er auf der Insel Panay überliefert ist. Mir gefällt an dieser Szene ganz besonders, dass die edle Dame in einer fliegenden Hängematte ankommt. Und diese fliegende Hängematte ist auch ein Luftschiff. Und da konnte ich auch... Das ist schön, weil das ist so ein Beispiel für die direkte Beziehung Filipino-Deutsch, weil das Deutsche kann ja dann ganz lange Wörter machen, anders als das Englisch. Ich kann dann ein fliegendes Hängemattenboot quasi in den Text bringen. Und noch wichtiger, Sinilandang Bulan, diese edle Dame, sagt, sie habe diese fliegende Hängematte von einem Punjabi gekauft. Es gibt viele Punjabi-Händler in den Philippinen. Und das ist natürlich auch eine Referenz an 1001 Nacht, an die Geschichten, die von weit her kommen. Und dieses Mädchen, 15-jährig in Panay, sagt, sie möchte gern in die Welt reisen und vor allem auch die ganz anderen Sprachen hören. Das heißt, dieses Buch ist nicht das Buch eines Rückzugs, sondern da ist die Vision drin, wie diese alten Geschichten von der Panay Bukidnon in einer ganz neuen Art sich mit anderen Geschichten der Welt verbinden können. Ich überspringe etwas. Eine wichtige Frage ist, warum es hier im Text Aswang heißt. Das ist ein Wort, das ich nicht übersetzt habe. Warum? In diesem Roman kommt auch ein Pater Obaba vor, also ein Spanier. Und der macht genau das, was die Spanier gemacht haben. Die kamen da an als Kolonialherren und haben alles neu benannt. Sie haben zum Beispiel überall Teufel gesehen. Alle diese Geister, die Naturgeister, wurden in ihren Augen Teufel, die weisen Frauen waren Hexen etc. Es war für mich klar, dass ich in der Übersetzung diese koloniale Geste des Überschreibens nicht wiederholen will. Sondern dass Aswang bleibt und wir im Laufe des Romans herausfinden, was war eine Aswang, bevor die Spanier da ihre eigenen Obsessionen hineingelegt haben. Ich sage noch, nein, ich überspringe das, die wurden auch genannt. Bevor ich weitergebe, um nicht zu lang zu werden, möchte ich kurz auf den Titel und die Ausschreibung dieses Panels eingehen. Die Organisatorinnen gehen davon aus, dass World Literature auf Englisch stattfindet. Das stimmt in gewissem Sinn. Englisch ist die stärkste Sprache, aber eben auch vor allem ökonomisch. Es wird sehr wenig ins Englische übersetzt, aber viel aus dem Englischen. Das ist nein, ich würde nicht, aber es ist einfach es Ausdruck der ökonomischen Machtverhältnisse, die auch historische Wurzeln haben. Aber Englisch ist bei weitem nicht die einzige Sprache der Verständigung. Spanisch ist ein wichtiges. Und zum Beispiel, für mich ist Französisch sehr wichtig, dass die zweite Landessprache ist. Und ich finde die Diskussion auf Französisch zwischen Westafrika, der Karibik, Frankreich über das Übersetzen und Kolonialismus sehr viel reichhaltiger als die deutsche Diskussion. Und das findet aber auch etwas abgeschottet vom Englischen statt. Also es gibt andere Verständigungssprachen. Und ich hoffe, meine Vision der Welt wäre, dass wir beitragen können zu einer multipolaren Welt im positiven Sinn, also nicht als Anarchismus der Diktatoren, sondern wirklich ein dichtes Netz von Beziehungen zwischen Sprachen, von Malayalam zu Filipino, von Kiswahili zu Persisch. Ich finde es total interessant zu entdecken, wie sich zwischen Tschechisch und Bicolano eine Verbindung ergibt, dank unserem Kollegen Christian Sendero, der da irgendwo ist oder vielleicht auch nicht mehr. Aber Sie werden ihm bestimmt noch begegnen. Es mag in einer Zeit, in der das menschliche Übersetzen und das Sprachenlernen an sich von Propheten der KI als anachronistisches Tun bezeichnet wird, da mag es romantisch klingen, was ich hier sage. Wenn ich aber sehe, wie die größeren philippinischen Verkehrssprachen 400 Jahre Kolonialherrschaft überstanden haben und sich immer neu beleben. Und ich finde, es ist ein wunderbarer Zufall, dass gerade Hip-Hop gespielt wurde, bevor wir anfangen, weil ich finde, die Lebendigkeit von Filipino erlebe ich vor allem im Hip-Hop. Und das gibt mir Hoffnung für die Zukunft unserer eigenen Zunft. Ich danke Ihnen.
Hello, is it working? Can you hear me well? Yeah, hello. Thank you so much to everyone, to the audience for being here, to my esteemed colleagues, and also to the translators for their wonderful job. So as was said in the earlier presentation, I come from England, but I translate from English into Spanish. So these are the two books that I have translated from the Philippines. The first one is Nick Joaquin, a selection of short stories by Nick Joaquin, and the second one, a novel by Jose Dalisay. I would like to start by saying that as a translator of the Philippines, my job entails doing much more than translating the actual text. The problem with the Philippines is that most people in Europe, and particularly in my home country, Spain, have never read a book from the Philippines. So if you go to any bookshop, there isn't any shelf that says Philippines. Like you would find shelves of literature from Germany or France, from the US, but not from the Philippines. No. So my first job is actually to convince the publisher that there's a very valuable and interesting literature in the Philippines that has to be translated. Pretextos has published more than 5,000 books in Spanish since the 70s. And yet when I approached them, they had never translated or published any Filipino author. So that was the first challenge, right? And they see that as a risky business because of that lack of knowledge of the audience. No? So I had to convince them. In this sense, it was wonderful to have the support of the National Book Development Board, and I cannot, from the Philippines, and I cannot thank them enough. They provided a subsidy so that we could cover the basic expenses of the publishing and also my honorarium as a translator. So that really made a huge difference, and it was key in convincing the publishers that this was an endeavor that they could take without taking too much risk. No? So that was part of my job. I think also going to the Philippines is important, you know, knowing the country from which you are translating, visiting the bookshops. Particularly, there's a great bookshop in Manila, Solidaridad, where I bought like 30 books on one trip, and I was reading Filipino literature to try to get a sense of what is being written, both in terms of the classics and also in terms of the contemporary literature of the country. And once I had that knowledge, that is also complemented by my work as a researcher, because I'm a scholar who studies and writes about Filipino literature and history, then I felt in a comfortable position to approach the publisher and make this book pitch, no, that present this project. And we started with Nick Joaquin because he's a classic in the Philippines, and also because this is an interesting case of a Filipino author who wrote in English even though Spanish was his first language. And we tend to forget, of course, Spanish, the Philippines was a Spanish colony for 333 years. Then in 1898, the US took over, but there was an entire generation of Filipinos, especially elite Filipinos in Manila, who still spoke Spanish at home. And that was the case of Nick Joaquin. Nick Joaquin spoke in Spanish with his mother, with his father. He wrote letters in Spanish, but then he wrote his literature in the language in which he was schooled, and that was English. No? So in a way, when I was translating Nick Joaquin from English into Spanish, I had the impression that it was almost like a back translation, that somehow I was restoring the stories to the language in which they were primarily thought or imagined. No? Also, many of these stories take place in the early modern colonial period when the Spaniards arrived in the Philippines. So it made a lot of sense, I thought, to translate that book into Spanish. And I'm very pleased to see here in Frankfurt that it has already been translated into Italian, for instance, and other languages. And once we had already introduced the Philippines in the market, then another difficult challenge is to find reviewers, because most journalists or literary reviewers, they are comfortable reviewing what they know about, you know. So if I translate Madame Bovary, you know, for the 90th time into Spanish, you will get more reviews of that than if you translate any Philippine literature, no? So my advice would be, well, sometimes you have, instead of sending the book to any regular journalist, you have to send it to specialists sometimes, like specialists on the Philippines, academics, but not only academics, who are willing to write about the Philippines. And then the second advice is that sometimes there's people who are not, you know, highbrow journalists or intellectuals, but who can still do reviews in non-traditional formats. There's a very famous influencer in Spain who specializes in Asian literature, and we sent her a copy, and she did a very nice video that she uploaded on YouTube, and many people bought the book because of that. So that's also, I think, you know, exploring non-traditional formats is also a nice way of making sure that you get reviews, that you get attention for the book. And then the book by Dalisa is more recent. It has just been published like a month ago. And this is a book by a contemporary author who is actually here in Frankfurt, and I had the privilege of meeting him last year. And this is a book on a very important topic. The millions of Filipinos who spend their lives abroad as overseas workers. And particularly, there are many women who work as maids or nurses, and they are all around the world. But this book focuses on one specific case of a Filipino woman who lives and works as a maid in Saudi Arabia. And I met the author, interviewed him last year, and that was also something very valuable because I could publish the interview in a Mexican magazine, and that already prepared the audience for the appearance of the imminent translation. No, as of difficulties that I have encountered translating these books, I think I've commented on Nick Joaquin already. The interesting thing with Dalisay is that even though he writes in English, the characters are supposed to be speaking in Tagalog or Filipino. And sometimes he introduces Tagalog words in the text in English. No? So to me, that was a challenge because, of course, I'm translating into Spanish, but then what do you do with those Tagalog words? And I decided to keep them. No? I've seen other examples. The German translator introduced a glossary at the end of the book. But I thought in my case, it would make more sense maybe to add a few more words to make sure that from the context, the reader can infer what the meaning of that Tagalog word was. But I wanted to keep that because I thought that was an important mark of the diglossia or the bilingualism or plurilingualism in the Philippines, where there's a country where there's very few people who speak just one language. I mean, most Filipinos speak at least two languages, and in many cases more. So I wanted to keep those different layers in the translation. And I think that's enough to begin with. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here and for helping us and for organizing this. And thank you for being the guest of honor, because without the Philippines being the guest of honor, I think a lot of books would never have been translated into German. Because maybe that's a good time to talk just very briefly about money. Translators are not paid very well. And this is why it's always a risk if you don't know, is this book going to sell well or not? For the publishers, it's a risk. So if you get funding for the translation, this already helps so much. And this is why we have to thank every guest of honor, and especially this year, the Philippines, that they have these programs. Thank you so much for this. Because otherwise, or maybe we would have tried to translate it, and because I'm the publisher and the translator in this case, and we loved this book so much. It's called Some People Need Killing. I'll tell you why it's still got the English title. But we thought this book was so important, we would have done it anyway. We found it when my colleague was there and took a look around and listened to people what they thought was the most important book, or one of the books that really moved people. And actually, they weren't talking about a certain novel. Well, they were talking about novels, of course, but they were also talking about this non-fiction book. We usually don't do non-fiction books, but this book convinced us. We thought it was so important because it told us something about the Philippines, about the Duterte regime, about extrajudicial killings, about an autocrat and the language autocrats use. And at the same time, it tells us so much about the world we live in, no matter which country we're talking about. Because, I mean, just take a look what's going on in this world right now. So we thought, yes, this tells us something about the Philippines and at the same time about our world, the world we live in. So we need this book. And for whatever reason, we were so lucky to acquire the rights. Now, me as a translator, I usually translate fiction. And this book was written by a journalist. She writes very well. It's fantastic. She's got a very good style. She could write novels. She could write anything, absolutely. But I'm used to translate fiction. And translating non-fiction, for me, was something completely different. I had to, of course, I had to decide on what kind of language to use. I knew I had to be so much more precise in a different way, not just, you know, carry across the meaning or a certain sentiment or whatever, but I had to be really precise because this book is based on reality. It's based on things that actually happened. It's got like a quarter of the book is, let's call it proof that the things she writes about really did happen, that everything is true that is written in this book. And so I had to stay true to her language and to what she was talking about here. I wasn't allowed to take any liberties. So for me, this was kind of a new experience. I don't really know how to describe it. I hope it somehow comes across. And while translating, I mean, I once read that the brain doesn't make a difference when you watch a movie if it is fiction or if it is real. So if you see a person dying, you feel really bad and whatever. I think it, at least in this case, and at least my brain did make a huge difference, because when I translate fiction, I know it's fiction. I know, okay, somebody dies and this is not, okay, it don't feel happy when it translates fiction where people die or where animals die or where children die. But in this case, I knew all the time that these things really happened, that there are still people out there who were relatives of the victims Patricia writes about, that there are still people around suffering from what had happened. And it really, really was, it was really hard for me. It was hard for me. And I took it with me the whole time. And I didn't sleep very well. So that was another thing that, was a new experience for me. Talking about grammar, I think what Patricia did here was she tried to be as universal and as global in her language as possible, because she knew right from the start, this isn't just a topic for the Philippines. This is a topic for the world. This is important for the world. So it has to be understood everywhere. And this is, then of course it's good if you have the English language to write in, but also she chose certain words and explained certain words so that everyone would understand these words. And she explained a lot about the grammar of autocrats. She uses examples where to show us how important language is and how language changes and what it does to people. For example, there is this word encounter. And so when you read an article about, or a report about something that the police did last night, and it says there was an encounter with a person, it doesn't mean, oh, they just met someone. It means violence happened and somebody died. So this is how she explains words and how they came to change the meaning. And she gives examples from dictionaries, that certain words have a certain meaning in certain parts of the world in English, but in her English, in the Philippine English, it has a very different meaning. And this I found highly interesting. I learned so much. I learned a lot. I'm always very grateful when I learn something. I had fun with diving deep into German grammar, because at one point she writes about transitive and intransitive verbs, and I had to find different examples in German, of course, and still make it understood what she's trying to tell us. And so in this case, this part was fun in a very different way. But all in all, it was, translating non-fiction and at the same time hoping to stay true to the original and bring this message across. That was a hard job. And I'm still so grateful that she wrote this book. Yeah, that's all I want to say about this book.
Ja, dem Original gerecht werden, das wollen wir natürlich alle. Bevor ich anfange, über die Übersetzung von Candy Gourlays Wild Song zu sprechen, auch von mir nochmal ein herzliches Dankeschön, dass wir ÜbersetzerInnen hier eine Bühne bekommen und ins Rampenlicht gerückt werden. Vielen und Superheroes. Ich habe schon überlegt, ob ich so ein Superwoman-Shirt mir heute anziehen wollte, aber dann dachte ich, das ist nicht ernsthaft genug. So, Zeitsprung wirklich vom ganz aktuellen Bericht zu einem historischen Roman. Candy Gourlay hat mit Wild Song einen fesselnden Coming-of-Age-Roman geschrieben. Er führt uns LeserInnen in das Jahr 1904. Wir haben schon gehört, hinter die Philippinen liegt eine 300-jährige spanische Besatzung. Zu dem Zeitpunkt 1904 werden sie von den USA regiert. Und die Protagonistin Lukis Bergdorf im Bontoc, also da verändert sich dadurch viel. Nur die Möglichkeit für junge Frauen sind eigentlich nach wie vor beschränkt. Luki ist eine hervorragende Jägerin, darf sie offiziell gar nicht machen. Die Ältesten wollen das nicht, würden sie am liebsten deswegen verheiraten. Und auch wenn sie diesem jungen Mann zugetan ist, sagt sie, nee, also ich will meine eigene Wahl treffen. Mir sagt eigentlich niemand, was ich machen soll. Und dann, und das ist jetzt historisch verbrieft, kommt die Einladung von dem Präsident Theodore Roosevelt zur Weltausstellung nach St. Louis. Und Luki kommt diese Einladung eigentlich nur recht. Damit kann sie aus diesem beengenden Leben, was sie empfindet, ausbrechen. Und sie denkt jetzt, sie reist ins Land der unbegrenzten Möglichkeiten, muss aber erfahren, dass da die Chancen sehr ungerecht verteilt sind. Ja, und sie erfährt eben auch nicht, dass sie Gast dort ist und die Welt sehen kann, sondern dass sie eben im philippinischen Reservat zu Ausstellungsstücken werden. Das ist der Rahmen. Autorin Candy Gourlay ist auch hier, ist im ersten Leben sozusagen Journalistin und sie wuchs im Süden der Philippinen auf und bis zum 6. Lebensjahr war ihre Sprache Visayan. Als 6-Jährige ist die Familie dann nach Manila gezogen. Da sagte die Mutter so, wir reden jetzt mal alle Englisch. Also ihre Sprache, mit der sie aufgewachsen ist, kann sie eigentlich gar nicht mehr. Und Tagalog lernte sie dann tatsächlich erst in der Schule, ist praktisch also nicht so vertraut wie Englisch. Deswegen hat sie dieses Buch in Englisch geschrieben und deswegen konnte ich das auch übersetzen. Generell, also egal was für einen Übersetzungsauftrag, bevor ich einen Übersetzungsauftrag annehme, lese ich natürlich das Buch ganz, mache mir Gedanken, ob ich das Thema zu fassen kriege, ob ich der Melodie gewachsen bin. Und Candys Roman hat mich eigentlich von Anfang an begeistert. Allerdings eben die Geschichte, in der Lukis traditionelle, naturverbundene Welt der vermeintlich modernen in den USA, ist ja auch historisch, kenne ich mich ja auch nicht aus, gegenübergestellt sind, da gab es tatsächlich mehrere Herausforderungen. Einerseits musste ich umfangreich recherchieren, Flora, Fauna, Umgebung der Philippinen, auf der Reise, die sie begehen und die Weltausstellung. So als kleines Beispiel, wenn beschrieben wird, Luki reist nach Manila und da ist auf einmal von Oyster Shell Shutters die Rede. Okay, Oyster Shell Shutters, ne, so wie Europäer, Oyster Shell, irgendwas mit Muschel, Perlmutt. Und dann denke ich, nee, Perlmutt hätte ja jetzt Mother of Pearls schreiben können. Also, aber irgendwie Oyster Shells, was soll das sein? Und dann habe ich tatsächlich eben in alten Büchern recherchiert und das sind dann eben Fensterläden, die mit Austernschale ganz leicht belegt sind. Da ist auch nichts verziert. Hält den Wind ab und das Licht kommt rein. Ne? Also das sind so Winzigkeiten und da kann man sich eben ganz dolle aufhalten als Übersetzerin. Also andererseits wollte ich der Beschreibung von der Natur und der Verbundenheit, wenn wir uns eben noch auf den Philippinen aufhalten, bevor das losgeht, sowie die Bräuche und die Gewohnheiten, ja eigentlich die in ihrer Schönheit und Normalität, wollte ich gern aus derselben Nähe darstellen als Übersetzerin wie die Autorin und möglichst vermeiden, dass ja meine Übersetzung zu einem fremden Blick wird, sondern wir wirklich ganz nah an der Figur bleiben. Das beginnt bei dem Roman schon in der Erzählhaltung, nämlich Luki erzählt mit einer ganz großen Selbstverständlichkeit die Geschichte ihrer toten Mutter. Also die Mutter, die ist die Empfängerin, an die ist die Erzählung adressiert und der stellt sie auch Fragen. Und das liegt dann wieder der Weltvorstellung dieser Bergvölker, also in dem Fall der Bontoc eben zugrunde, nämlich dem Animismus. Da wird einfach alles ist beseelt. Menschen, Pflanzen, Steine, alles. Und wenn eben jetzt jemand stirbt, ist es irgendwie nicht so Himmel-Hölle oder sowas. Also wenn der Hund stirbt, hat Candy erzählt, dann also gibt es zwar eine andere Welt, aber eigentlich ist der auch noch immer bei uns und beschützt uns vielleicht. Also das musste ich möglichst zu fassen kriegen. Und diese Verantwortung habe ich noch größer empfunden, weil Rotfuchs sich dafür entschieden hat, den Roman als Own Voice-Geschichte zu bewerben. Aber da hat eben Candy auch erzählt, naja, also inwieweit ist sie Own Voice, wenn sie historisch sich in eine Region begibt, die sie nicht kennt und sie ist auch keine Bontoc. Und das hat es mir dann auch ein bisschen wieder einfacher gemacht, mich da reinzubegeben. Noch so kleine Beispiele. Ich gucke auf die Uhr, ich kürze das hier auch so ein bisschen ab. Bei der Weltausstellung hatte Candy mir auch anfangs auch Fotomaterial zur Verfügung gestellt. Ich habe recherchiert und das hat auch sehr geholfen, wenn es, ich mache doch noch mal so ein kleines Beispiel vielleicht und sage das Englische. Also manchmal begegnen einem Begriffe, wo man denkt, oh, die sind ja irgendwie total einfach und dann hat es aber vielleicht mehrere Bedeutungen. Der englische Satz war, wir sind Weltausstellung. The attractions were oddities. Here was a horse that could count by tapping his hoof on the ground. Babies were kept in boxes. Ja, okay, wie jetzt? Babys in Boxes? Also was jetzt auf Deutsch hat im Deutschen mehrere Möglichkeiten. Schachtel, Kisten, Kästen, also keine Ahnung. Ne? Also, aber wir haben eben Luki, für die ist alles neu. Also ich muss recherchieren, was sieht sie denn da jetzt eigentlich, um das richtig übersetzen zu können. Und Zeitungsartikeln sei Dank und auch Fotos habe ich dann eben festgestellt, was bei der Ausstellung eben medizinische Neuheiten auch präsentiert würden, nämlich zum Beispiel für frühgeborene Inkubatoren, dass da wirklich viele Babys gestorben sind. Das ist jetzt mal hier eine Randnotiz, die kommt da auch nicht vor. Also, dann war für mich die Entscheidung in Anlehnung an Brutkästen, wir nennen das eben auch nicht nur Inkubatoren, Brutkästen, dann waren es eben die Babys liegen in Glaskästen. So, sie lesen drüber, sie stolpern nicht drüber, ist eben eine Entscheidung. Okay, die historischen Figuren, da tauchen auch historische Figuren auf, müssen dann natürlich auch recherchiert werden, dass man die richtig zu fassen kriegt. Und jetzt an der Stelle, es wurde gedankt, wer hier alles fördert. Wir übersetzen prekär, ich kann auch noch mal ein paar Zahlen nennen, jammer, jammer. Aber also im deutschsprachigen Raum ist es tatsächlich ein Durchschnittsgehalt von ÜbersetzerInnen liegt so bei 20.000 € brutto im Jahr. Das Durchschnittsgehalt in Deutschland allgemein liegt bei 35.000 € im Jahr brutto. Das ist das Durchschnittsgehalt. Das heißt, das sind jetzt nur mal, dass Sie so eine Vorstellung haben. Also reich werden wir nicht. Ich habe mein Buch zum Beispiel vom Deutschen Übersetzerfonds, die Übersetzung gefördert worden, sodass ich einfach mehr Zeit hatte zu recherchieren. Das ist für uns ganz tolle Möglichkeiten. hatte ich zum Beispiel auch Zeit, mit Menschen aus der deutschsprachigen philippinischen Community zu reden. Und ich glaube, ich hatte zwar noch was, aber ich höre jetzt einfach auf. Ja, dann können wir nämlich noch diskutieren. Gut, Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, Zoe, Annette, and Dr. Castellvi. We are now open the floor for if you have any questions. If not, I will start. I really do think that you carry Philippine literature to your own original cultures and also to a third culture. So for that, I am really grateful because you are indeed the superheroes, sometimes the silent ones, you know. So I just want to ask one thing that you mentioned. For example, Dr. Castellvi mentioned that you add words, clarifying words, in order to be able to, for your people from your own culture to understand it, right? Would you consider that, would you put that in the footnotes or would you put that in the main body of the text usually?
So yeah, thank you so much for the question. I mean, my position as a translator is that every footnote I add is an acknowledgement of failure, right? As a translator. So I try to the extent possible to avoid footnotes. So what I try to do, let me give an example because it might sound like a bit abstract otherwise. There's this concept of the balikbayan boxes, right? That Filipinos who live abroad, sometimes they fill a box with candy or chocolate or electronics, and they just send it back to the Philippines, to their families. For instance, if they cannot spend Christmas with them, right? So the English original would say balikbayan box, which might be very clear to a Filipino, but if I translate that literally into Spanish, nobody in Spain would know what that means, a balikbayan box, no? Like the baby in the box that was mentioned earlier. So maybe I in a case like that, maybe I would add, you know, balikbayan box with gifts from an expat Filipino, something like that. It's something very exceptional because also it's not that there's a Tagalog word on every page, but occasionally when that happens, if I feel like adding a short phrase in Spanish, 2 or 3 words, makes the meaning of that term clear, then that's a liberty that I take as a translator. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a question that has really been on my mind, and because Alan Derain, like Ateneo de Manila Press, actually had a very long glossary for the Filipino readers because he talks about things a lot of Filipinos don't know because they're not familiar with Panay Bukidnon mythology. So, but we also said no footnotes because that gives the impression to people, oh, this is difficult, so they don't want to read it. But we had in the end we had we had a table of persons because they have names like Humadapnon or Nagmalitong Yawa si Nagmaling Diwata. That's very difficult for a German reader. So you have to be able to look it up. Who's that again? And I explain some terms in a postscript of the translator. But we have another example. This is Obelo Reyes. We decided, because Ang Diablo sa Filipinas is a text from the 19th century. And actually Isabelo himself saw himself as a folklorista. That was a movement in Spain, inspired by England, to actually research popular knowledge and folklore. And we decided he had this Baroque style of having a dedication to this and that. And then we had our basis was an edition of 2014, where Benedict Anderson and Guillermo, Bomen Guillermo already had a lot of footnotes and things. And we actually took some of their footnotes and did footnotes to the footnotes. And so we decided we take Cervantes, that tradition, as an example, where you have where you go overboard with kind of dedications and postscripts and everything. And there is something very Baroque to Philippine culture. I think that's why Nick Joaquin also wrote a book called Tropical Baroque. So I think I would answer the question depending on the book.
Yes, and sometimes you have to give some like historical context. We did it once in an Indonesian novel, for example. So of course we talked to the author first, and just to explain the meaning of the year 1965. And here Patricia added for the translation, she added something that had just happened in the present, meaning after she had finished the book. So she said, we need to add this fact that Duterte was, hold on, I'll find it. No, it's okay, I do it by heart. Im März 2025 wurde Duterte in Den Haag angeklagt, wegen Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit. Im Mai wurde er in seiner Heimatstadt in Abwesenheit zum Präsidenten, zum Bürgermeister gewählt. And this is something about Duterte that everybody in the Philippines will know about, but people who read the translation or do not live there probably haven't heard anything about. So this goes into the translation to give context.
So in youth literature, usually you don't do footnotes in fiction because it would look like a school book, and then they don't want to read it. And well, there's Candy's written some historical note afterwards. So if you want to get into everything what happens, you can read that, but you can read the text stands alone. And she uses a lot of not a lot, but she uses Spanish phrases. But she always, kind of explained it, not with a like translation, but yeah, you get what's going on, and try to build that as well in the German edition. So we could go without.
Thank you very much for giving us also some insights, not only in the decisions that you have to make, right, but also about the transformations that you saw in the novel, right? The societal transformations, for example, in the case of Wild Song, from the transition from Spanish to the American colonial period, right? And I think that's very interesting, and also the insights into the economic, right? The work, the salaries of translators, and of course the research and the value of grants, because oftentimes we really need to do additional research to provide this crucial context, right? So
yeah, no, I wanted to comment on that, because it's true that sometimes, especially with this historical fiction, because of that lack of general knowledge about the Philippines, you do need to frame that work to the audience. No? So, for example, in the case of my first translation, the short stories by Nick Joaquin that are set in the early colonial period, I asked another scholar, a colleague, to write an introduction about Nick Joaquin, whom nobody knew in Spain, and also about the stories themselves. Whereas sometimes if you translate something which is more contemporary, not always, but sometimes, like this second novel about the Filipinos overseas workers, we thought that in this case the novel was self-explanatory, and that really it's so contemporary, the topic, and people know about it, that there was no need for a paratext in this case, no? So it depends on the book. It totally depends on the book.
thank you for the intelligence and the creativity also that you apply in your work, and I think that is very much appreciated. So yeah, do you have any other questions? Can we open the floor to the audience? No more, Annette?
If there's no question, I thought I'd share an observation again on the world literature.
Yes.
Like, sorry if I'm a bit on that. Yeah, because I came across, when I went to Bad Berleburg, I came through Marburg. And in Marburg, there was a professor called Erich Auerbach, who was a specialist on world literature in German. Weltliteratur. He took up the concept by Goethe. And he had to leave Germany because he was Jewish. So he was exiled, and he survived the National Socialist crimes in Istanbul. So he became a German teacher in Istanbul and survived in Turkey. He couldn't come back because even after the war, the Germans didn't give him a job, so he went to the US. And there he wrote an important article, Philologie und Weltliteratur. And this one was translated by Edward Said, who's, the Palestinian American thing. And when translating it, he left, like Aswang, he left Weltliteratur in German. So the English text is called Philology and Weltliteratur. So, and why didn't he want to translate the word Weltliteratur into English? Because at the time there was already a Cold War concept of world literature being being all that is universal in the sense at what comes up to American standards of literature. What's a great American novel, and Alan Derain, actually, who sits there, has a fabulous little novella called The Next Great Tagalog Novel, which also makes fun of some of these ideas. So Erich Auerbach was very strong on the point that world literature shouldn't be just everything becoming the same, everything being everything complying with dominant market ideas of what's sellable or so. And Edward Said shared this idea because he felt that, and he shared it so much that he refused to take on the English term world literature. Yeah. So I thought it was interesting, and I discovered this story because of the Gastlandauftritt, and I was sent to Bad Berleburg, and I wanted to know who's Erich Auerbach, and I found out this fabulous coming together of this Jewish-German exilee and Edward Said.
May we just end with, thank you, Annette. May we just end, how do you feel about being called superheroes? Yeah, as translators. So I'm just curious. How...
Yeah, like I said, quite nice, you know. I thought of wearing Superwoman. It really, usually, you know, we are hidden. So I thank you for giving us this stage.
I've never been to a panel with a cooler title.
Yeah.
There's a question.
That's why I would like very much to have contact from you. If you're such a hero, I'm writing a book right now, and therefore I would like very much to have a contact, so card or something. Sorry about that, Kim.
Yeah, no, thank you. I feel always very honored when people contact me. People contact us because we translate. But I think that the ideal translator should be invisible, no? And when we do a good job is when people don't really realize they're reading a translation. But then on the same time, I think it's good to be paid well and to have our names on the cover and to be acknowledged, no? And I also wanted to add that even though I know English is a world language and it has such a dominance, but in fact, when we focus on English literature written in the US and the UK, and maybe sometimes a few post-colonial, but not in the Philippines. No? So it would be good to put the focus on the Philippines as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our distinguished speakers. Please stay because there will be a performance called Love's Secret by William Blake, translated by Lamberto Antonio, music by Josefino Toledo, and performed by Jonathan Zion.
Jonathan Zion's bass baritone, received his bachelor's degree in voice cum laude from the University of the Philippines, where he studied under Professor Andrea O. Veneracion. In 2000, he completed his postgraduate studies at Berlin University of the Arts with Professor Herbert Brauer. He is a laureate of the 7th Sylvia Getzi International Colocatura Singing Competition and a finalist in both the 13th National Johann Sebastian Bach Competition and the Mendelssohn Singing Competition. In Berlin, he has been engaged by the Neue Kölner Oper and the Neue Opernbühne and the Kammeroper. As a concert singer, he has frequently performed the bass parts in the great oratorios of Bach, Mozart, Handel, Haydn, Brahms, Mendelssohn, and Rossini. His recital appearances have taken him to Germany, Italy, Sweden, the Czech Republic, Costa Rica, the United States, and his native, the Philippines. He is also dedicated to contemporary music. At the Salzburg Festival, he sang the world premiere of the Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's Düfte Zeichen. He later took on the solo baritone part of Orvonton in the world premiere of Stockhausen's final opus Klang at the Cologne Triennale. Zayens has also performed other works by Stockhausen, Szenario, Zender, Grimm, Edwards, and the like. At the Berlinale Festspiele, Schwetzinger Festspiele, Venice Biennale, and the Agora Festival in Paris. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Zayens.
Malungkot, malungkot, ang tonong nagmumula sa plauta. Nakakawangis ng hibik, 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 hibik. Nang umiilan lang na musika sa libo-libong milya sa kabila ng bundok at ilog. Ang paglalakbay, ang paglalakbay, ay ting makirot. Waring nakikita, waring nakikita namin. Ang isang babaeng umaakyat sa toreng napakatayog, napakatayog sa toreng napakatayog. Naghihintay kanyang irog. Sa pagbabalik ng kanyang irog. Sa pagbabalik ng kanyang irog. Irog. Sa pagbabalik ng kanyang irog. Huwag sasabihin ang iyong pag-ibig. Ang di sinasabi ay maaari nang pagkat ang banayad na hanging pag-ibig ay sakdal tahimik. Hindi nakikita. Nagsabi rin ako. Sinabi sa kanya ang aking damdamin. Nasindak ng lamig, animo minulto. Nagawa nga niyang ako ay lisanin. Sa biglang paglayo sa akin ng mahal. Isang manlalakbay ang nagdaan pala. Napakatahimik, hindi natatanaw. Mahal ko'y nakuha. Nagsabi rin ako. Sinabi sa kanya ang aking damdamin. Nasindak ng lamig, animo minulto. Nagawa nga niyang ako ay lisanin. Sa biglang paglayo sa akin ang mahal. Isang manlalakbay ang nagdaan pala. Napakatahimik, hindi natatanaw. Mahal ko'y nakuha. Sa buntong hindi nga. The composer of the piece is in our midst at the moment. Chino Toledo.